and welcome to our next session in our Psych Sessions New Year's Extravaganza Podference. I am pleased to be introducing Melissa or Missy Beers from The Ohio State University. Now, I offer this introduction of Missy's rebroadcast of her 2019 APA convention with a heavy heart, and I will come back and explain that comment in a moment. But I do want to give her an introduction that is worthy of her stature. Dr. Beers is the program director for the introductory psychology course at The Ohio State University and coordinator for the introduction to social psychology course. These are two important general education courses that often have a combined annual enrollment over 3,000 students every year. I think what's just as equally important to Missy is that she is a teacher of teachers, that she values graduate education and the imparting of how to teach as a graduate student so one of her key roles is to help graduate students not only become effective researchers as they go forward in whatever career they're going to have, but to have effective teaching skills as well. She gives back to the discipline in a variety of ways. She is currently the director for the STP programming at the APA convention. She'll do that as a 3-year gig. She is an active member. Actually, she's a steering committee member for the current APA Introductory Psychology Initiative, which is that 3-year gig that's going on right now, sponsored through APA. She's a co-chair of the Ohio Psychology Teaching Conference. She's a steering committee co-chair. And I'm pretty sure, although she hasn't listed it this way, that she's probably a co-founder of that organization. She's won numerous awards and recognitions on her campus as being an outstanding staff member and leader. She's got numerous publications and invited addresses around the country, around the state. And so, and she's one of our beloved colleagues around the country. Missy's talk was delivered at the 2019 American Psychological Association convention. It was sponsored by the Committee on Associate and Baccalaureate Education, or CABE. It was the Diane Halpern Invited Lecture. It was originally delivered on August 10th, 2019 in Chicago, Illinois. And the title of her talk is The 21st Century Teacher, Why Training and Development Has Never Been More Important. Now, I opened with a heavy heart. Obviously, this Podference is being broadcast on January 1st, 2020. And we are rebroadcasting things that have been pre-recorded as part of the professional development that we want to offer. And if you know Missy at all, sadly, tragically, on December 23rd, 2019, she lost her husband, Randy Leffler. And our hearts go out to Missy and her son, Ben, on this loss. And Missy, we have no words for you other than you are in our thoughts and our prayers, and we're thinking about you. And we hope that you will find strength in the coming days and months to carry forward. And this episode is obviously dedicated to the memory of your husband. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here on a Saturday afternoon. I'm so grateful that you're all here. We're going to have a great time. There's this thing we do in Ohio. OH! My people. My people. And we say OH? IO, right? So thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad to be here. And it's really such it's such a thrill and an honor to be here giving a talk that's named for Diane Halpern, who is just an absolute hero. And if you didn't notice in Eric's talk, if any of you attended Eric's Brewer talk or Brewer Award address, one of only 6 women who have won the Brewer Award out of 24 awardees, including Jane Hallinan here. But I thought that was very remarkable. And so I really want to dedicate this talk to her and her contributions to our field. And this talk really especially is inspired by this 1998 article, which if you have not read, I highly recommend, A Paradigm for Scholarship in the 21st Century. So I hope that you will take a look at this article if you haven't recently. And I think there's many, many important messages in this theme that are really relevant to us today. So feel free to take a picture of that if you to remember to read that article later. You'll also see Wilbert McKeechee, Bill McKeechee was an author on that paper. It's a really important paper that outlined what we should consider scholarship to be. So we'll talk about that as we continue. So our agenda for today, to give you an overview of what I'd like to do with our time together. First, I really want to take some time to appreciate the skill set of teaching. What does it take to be a teacher in higher education, really anywhere, but especially in higher education now, today, in our present time? And then I want to think about how do we develop these skills? What does it take? What does it need for us to develop these skills? And then what's at stake? What is the reason that we need these skills, right? What's the risk if we don't? So that's our outline for today. That's our goal. So I'm just going to set a little timer for myself to keep myself on track. And let's get going. So first, I do like to just know who's in our room. So could I see any graduate students here today with us? One bold graduate student. Thank you very much for being here. How about community college? Anyone from community college? Yes, excellent. Teaching-focused colleges. Great. Research institutions? Fantastic. Excellent. How many folks on the tenure track? Great. I am a non-tenure track person, so I like to know who, like me, may not be on the tenure track. Anybody? Great. Excellent. My people, welcome. So there's something here for all of us in this talk today. What I'd like for you to do is just take a moment and reflect on the training and experience that you've had recently. So thinking about all of these ways that you could train and develop your teaching, how many of you have participated in, not including this conference, one of these in the last year? As a student or as a teacher, Jane asks. How about as a student, as a participant, developing your teaching? How many of you have attended to develop your teaching? At least one in the last year. That's great. More than one in the last year. Okay, there's slightly fewer hands, but that's still good. How about before you started teaching? How many of you had at least one of these before you started teaching? More than one before you started teaching? Right. Are you seeing a trend? Are you seeing a pattern? Fewer hands go up before teaching. Right? But that's when we really need the help. Isn't that interesting? Isn't it curious? We sort of have this plague in our discipline that we're under-preparing people for this very, very important role. So I want to take a minute and think about, what do you think when it comes to skills that people should have? What should people know how to do when they enter the classroom for the first time? So please, I'd like just to take a minute, talk to a partner here, find someone in the room, hopefully someone that you haven't seen today, you haven't talked to yet today, and just give some thought to this question. What do you think is the most important skill an instructor should have before teaching a course for the first time? Okay, E080. Oh, there, you've learned already. Excellent. Thank you. I bet we could have a much longer conversation about that, but was everybody able to think about something that really was important to know before you started teaching for the first time? Great. So keep that in mind as we're talking through the session today, because I'll be wanting to know if any of the things that I'm going to be talking about were things that came up in your conversations, right? But first, I just want to compare the kinds of training that we get in other domains to the kind of training that we get for teaching. So this is me and my son, Ben, who is learning to drive in Ohio. It is the most harrowing experience of my entire life. Finally managed to calm the panic. But to drive a car in the state of Ohio, this is what's required of you. You have to complete a driver's education class, which is 24 hours of instruction, 8 hours of driving time, 50 hours of supervised driving with me, 10 hours at night. It is a big toll to take on your parent. You have to hold a permit for at least 6 months. There's a knowledge test and a vision screening, all before you're allowed to legally drive a car. Right? How does that compare to the training that you had before you taught a class for the first time? Now, another comparison is to be a yoga teacher, to be a teacher of yoga. Now, what do you think it takes to be certified to teach yoga? If you go to the Yoga Alliance website, they will tell you. You have to take a 500-hour teacher training program. So you already have to be an expert yogi. You have to know yoga, right? Then just knowing yoga isn't enough. You have to take a 500-hour teacher training program. There's coursework in anatomy, instructional techniques, the philosophy of yoga. What? That's great, but that's fantastic. Student teaching, continuing education, and you also have to be certified in CPR as a bonus. You also have to have that, right? Again, how does this compare to the training that you received before you were responsible for, 100 undergraduates the first time, right? I don't know. How does it compare? So I want to just take a moment and appreciate our skill set, the skill set that we need to have to be effective teachers. So I'm going to walk through some skills that have emerged as really critical skills from a program of research that I've been doing for a number of years with my colleagues, Jessie Hill, and Clarissa Thompson. So the three of us all have been involved in TA development, graduate student development, and instructor development. And we were really interested in what is the most critical thing to focus on. You have a limited time, usually before someone enters the classroom for the first time. Where should we focus our efforts? Where should we prioritize? Right? What do we really need to support first and foremost? And so we've done a number of things. So we started with a qualitative survey and asked the question we asked you. What are the important skills that people should have the first time they enter the classroom? And we asked graduate students and we asked faculty that question as well. And then we got this list of essential skills, and then we did a quantitative survey to prioritize and rank them, to ask people to rank them. We went back to another sample of faculty and graduate students across the country, asked them to rank these skills. And then we actually looked at observation protocols. So we looked at the people who were doing observation of new graduate students. We said, what are people looking for in the classroom? Because those are really important skills too. We wanted to make sure that we were covering those and that those were converging with what we were hearing. And we also reviewed established instruments like the model teaching competencies. Guy Boysen and Regan are here, the authors of that instrument, and also the TBC, the Teacher Behavior Checklist, which is Bill Buskis' work. So we looked at all of these established instruments, and we thought, these are the skills that I'm going to tell you have emerged. And so let's see how many of them came up in your conversations as well. So number one, you have got to know your content. Right? You've got to know what you're talking about. That came up really number one in almost every one of these. And so you have to be able to be competent in knowing the content that you're teaching. All right? Did that come up for anybody here? I see a couple heads nodding. And of course, the APA Code of Ethics says that psychologists will only practice and teach in the domains in which they have expertise, right? And we all know that that is not our experience when we're teaching. We're often learning the things right before the students. So it's really difficult. I was struck in Dan Willingham's talk, actually, thinking about that deep knowledge and how do we achieve that deep knowledge. And oftentimes new teachers are really just down at the factual level, all of the facts, getting the facts across, and don't really have the deep knowledge to draw from because they haven't really had classes in those topics themselves. So really teaching helps you to build this content knowledge, but we also have to support that as well. It's really important. We can't neglect it. Further, clarity of communication, right? So not just what we say and the facts that we have, but how clear are we at getting that information across? We all suffer from the curse of knowledge, right? That we just become blind to the things that we know. We don't really realize what it's like. I was also struck this morning in my skill building session. We had a skill building session this morning with graduate students, training each other, helping each other develop teaching skills. And one of the graduate students presented, here's how you make a syllabus. And I thought it was just masterful because you know what she did? She unpacked things that we all take for granted, that are implicit to those of us who have taught and made many, many syllabi. People in this room have made hundreds of syllabi. You probably have stopped thinking about some of the things that she had to lay clear and make very explicit. That's our curse of knowledge, right? It prevents us from seeing where other people may need us to be more clear. So as a demonstration of this, I want you to take a moment. Now, you may have seen this paragraph before, but just take a moment and read this paragraph. I'll read for those of you in the back. The procedure is actually quite simple. First, you arrange things into different groups depending on their makeup. Of course, one pile may be sufficient depending on how much there is to do. If you have to go somewhere else due to lack of facilities, that's the next step. Otherwise, you're pretty well set. It's important not to overdo things. It's better to do too few things at once than too many. This may not seem important, but complications can arise and a mistake can be expensive. At first, the whole procedure will seem complicated, but soon it will just become another fact of life. It's difficult to foresee any end to the necessity for this task in the immediate future, but then one never can tell. Do you know what it is? Do you know what it is? Doing laundry, right? Now, if you didn't know that it was doing laundry, take a moment and read it again. Now, all of a sudden, those things that were so vague make perfect sense. Things, now we know what things are. We know. But I will tell you one funny story. One of my favorite students of all time, actually, I always use this in my social psychology class, and I put this up and I ask the same question. Tell me, what is it? Does anyone know? One of my favorite students, I remember him vividly, raised his hand confidently and said, I know, Dr. Beers, it's going to the bathroom. I have never looked at this the same way. So you're welcome. And that is my gift to you. But then there's this famous quote, every beginning instructor discovers sooner or later that his first lectures were incomprehensible because he was talking to himself. So to stay mindful only of his own point of view, he realizes only gradually and with difficulty it's not easy to place oneself in the shoes of students who do not yet know about the subject matter of the course. Does anyone know who this quote is attributed to? He's famous. Who? No, not Bill McKeechee. Good guess, though. It's actually Piaget. How about that? So we've known this problem for some time, right? But we have to work on this. It's really important for us to be mindful and to watch our blind spots. Also, assessment, right? So this is really important. Remember, assess is a verb. It's a thing that we do, right? It's not a product, it's a thing that we do. So how do we assess what students understand? So this is, at one very simple level, it's designing our tests and our quizzes and our assignments. And then it's also using that information to inform our teaching, right? And so how many of us in this room really break down our exams, right? Or do you just look at an overall percentage, or do you really go through your exam and think about the components within the exam where students may have strengths or not? Now, that's something important that we should be doing. Or how many of us take our rubric and use it as data and analyze, right? Analyze the data to see what categories or what criteria, where did students do well on an assignment, right? Versus how they did. That's data, right? We're scientists. We should be thinking about that to inform our teaching and to inform our students' learning as well. And really, this gets at the issue of backwards design. Do we have good alignment in our courses? Are we aligning the things that we do in the classroom with our goals for student learning at the end? Because assessment is evidence that students have met those goals and objectives. Anybody familiar with backwards design? I love these hands going up. Thank you so much. If you're not familiar with backwards design, take a look at this great work from Diefing or Wiggins and McTighe, because what you do is you start with, at the end, what do we want students to look like at the end of our class? What do we want that to look like? What do we want students' experience to be? And then you reverse engineer your class from there, right? Instead of building from the ground up, and then you stop periodically and say, okay, what have I covered? That's what I'll test over, right? That's not a backwards design approach. All right, so have we hit on some of the things that came up in your conversation? Did any of these things come up so far? How about public speaking? Did public speaking come up in your conversations earlier? Anybody? Usually this is a thing. You have to know how to present and speak in public. But how many of us were terrified the first time we had to get up and speak in public, right? People, they've done studies. People would rather be burned in a fire than have to get up and talk in front of public speaking. That means you would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy at a funeral, right? That's a former speechwriter of Ohio State's President Gordon Yee used to say that line. But it's true, people are terrified. This is a very anxiety-provoking thing, especially for a new instructor. It's very scary. So we really need to think about building those public speaking skills, because that doesn't just help you in your teaching, right? Where else does that help you? In presenting your research, right? In presenting your defense of your dissertation, in presenting in life, right? In other contexts. So it really helps in so many ways. Classroom management. This is probably the thing that terrifies, next to public speaking, the second thing that terrifies new graduate students when they're getting ready to teach. Learning how do we harmoniously keep all of the pieces of our class together, right? How do we keep it all going? How do we manage our time? How do we manage, what if students say or do something and I don't know how to respond? And it's not easy. It's a skill that we have to build. In fact, those of you who were at Eric's talk, Eric was very brave, and thank you for sharing kind of a classroom management tragedy that you experienced, something that didn't go very well, that you learned from your mistake. That's really what it is how do we manage students' behavior, positive behavior and misbehavior in our classes. And the challenge is that teaching is very much cognitive load. We're under a lot of cognitive load when we're teaching. It's very effortful. It's not easy for us necessarily to leverage the strengths that we otherwise could bring to mediate conflict, right? Or to figure out how to answer a question or how to respond when a student gives us a wrong answer, right? So I think all of these are things that we need practice and training and development. This is a skill that we need to build. So if that isn't enough, on top of that very heavy list of things, we also have to build relationships with our students. We have to build trust. Now, I will say this started out with rapport, and Bill Buskus did so much great work articulating the importance of rapport. That was really important and valuable for me. And now Steve Chu is talking about this in terms of trust. Do we have trust? Do students trust us? Which is really interesting. But it really comes down to belonging and community. Are we creating a sense of community in our classroom? And now how do we learn how to do this on top of all the other things that I've just described, right? This is a big challenge for us. Well, there's a lot of research out there that shows the importance of it and how it makes a difference for students. It also comes down to inclusive design in our courses. Are we designing materials that are inclusive and accessible to our students in terms of the images that we use, the subtitles on our videos, even the directions on our assignments? Right? Being inclusive and really thinking about, again, making explicit and accessible to all of our students, not taking for granted that they understand our meaning. Is our LMS, is our course website set up in a way that's accessible to all students? Can they find the information that they need? And how do we know? Right? This is a big skill. And this marvelous piece that was just in the Chronicle, Vijay Sathi and Kelly Hogan from UNC. Really, if you haven't taken a look at this, it's fantastic. It's a great advice guide that's it lays out a blueprint for you in terms of what you can do in your own courses to make your course more accessible and to be inclusive in the language that you use, in your interactions with your students, even just in the design of your course. It's just a masterwork. And a book is forthcoming, which I cannot wait to get my hands on. Okay, are we tired yet? Because that is an awful lot. This is a very lengthy list, but there's more. How about being organized, right? Knowing how to plan and manage your time, how to keep on time, how to manage your grading, how to not be overwhelmed by all of the tasks that accompany teaching, right? Because when we're not organized, what do students experience? Things don't go well for them as well. In fact, poor organization is often one of students' biggest complaints about a class. They just don't understand how things are organized. They can't see it. And then another big complaint that students often experience is that we don't know how to use the technology, right? There's technology problems. And now we've all experienced those days when the projector wouldn't come on, or actually just this summer, the great Jane Hallinan came to visit my class, my graduate teaching class, and that was a day that none of the technology worked at all for any of us, not for me and not for the graduate student who was presenting. So believe me, it took a lot to stay composed in that situation, but I didn't necessarily have those skills when I first started teaching, right? I have learned over time. So knowing how to manage when things don't go right and how to use them effectively without overwhelming your students. And just for example, when I started teaching, it was pretty simple. We had a blackboard, right? Every now and then an overhead. Now we have to know all these things. There's all this equipment in the classrooms. All my students have iPads or laptops. There's all these the exhibit hall is full of so much technology, right? It's so many things. We have video capture software. I mean, you have to have an extra degree in technology just to do basic things, it seems, in your course. And this is just a snapshot. I just took the technology landscape. This is just a few of the products that are out there that we could possibly be using in our courses. It's just an overwhelming number of icons and new things coming up every day. So it's really, a skill, I think, to understand how to use them and when to use them and how to know whether they're working. Then we also have to know, what is it that we're going to do in the classroom? Lecture is one instructional technique, but there are many, many more. Some of you may be familiar with some of the words on this list: enhanced, flipped, blended, hybrid, transformational, cooperative, collaborative, competency-based, evidence-based. So many choices. If you recognize this list, you might remember an article that Steve Chu and Bill Serban wrote recently about being lost in a buzzword wasteland. There are so many different ways and techniques. How do we know what to effectively use in our classrooms, right? There are many. How do we gain mastery over the techniques when they seem to be the right one? Well, we really have to, again, have the skill to know and understand. So I think this comes down really to thinking about that. The article that I mentioned at the beginning is what is the definition of scholarship? Because this is a lot to ask of professionals, to know how to do all of these things. This is not negligible work. This is meaningful and important work. Right? Is it given the merit that it deserves? And so in their article, Halpern and her colleagues said, what should we call scholarship? How should we define it? Well, scholarship involves the creation of new knowledge, original research, the integration of knowledge, application of knowledge, the scholarship of pedagogy, which is teaching, but also the scholarship of teaching in psychology. Teaching is scholarship in its own right and for its own sake. It doesn't also have to come with a research design. Teaching itself is a noble act, and really we should think about that as a form of scholarship in our discipline. Because there's no one way to teach. We have to be versatile in many different forms of teaching. And here's the scholarship part. We have to know when to leverage those skills. When do we leverage this right skill at the right time for the right students to achieve the objective? This is one of my favorite quotes from Steve. Great teachers know how to become the kind of teacher their students currently need. There's no one size fits all. And it's very context specific. And it's going to depend, and there's going to be individual differences that we have to meet for our students. So this is our scholarship. We have to have these skills and know how to deploy them to help our students. And so how do we know, on the other side, how do we know when things go wrong? Well, this recent study by Leffler and colleagues was sort of the inverse of the teacher behavior checklist, which looked at the good things that teachers do. This looked at misbehaviors or the problem behaviors that students experience from their teachers. And if you check out this list, you may see many, many problem behaviors that could be prevented if teachers were trained in the skills that I just described. So students saying that problem behaviors they've exhibited: unrepresentative assessments, unrealistic expectations. Their teacher seemed to lack knowledge or communication skills. They were uncaring, unorganized. These correspond quite well to the skills which we just discussed. So how do we get these skills, right? These are really important skills. How do we build them? Where do we go? Well, it should start in grad school, right? I mean, it really should start somewhere in our doctoral training. We should, or somewhere in our graduate training, we should receive some kind of support. But the fact of the matter is we don't. It's not widely accepted for people to be trained for teaching in grad school. Usually, graduate students get the message, and maybe you heard this message: don't spend too much time on that teaching, right? Teaching is not really something you should spend your time on. You really need to focus on your research, and you should do as little of that teaching as possible. I have heard that message in many forms over many years. And in the STP guide to the training in the teaching of psychology, hold on, we're going to go back one. This is a document, we're actually updating it now for the 3rd edition, but we looked at model programs and asked them what were the components of their graduate teacher training programs. And 51 programs reported that they trained their graduate students in various ways. 88% of those, now that's not very many. Let's start first of all, that's not a whole lot of programs, right, in the country that have graduate training. We should have been really seeing a lot more. Only 88% of those model programs actually offered independent teaching experience. And then 84% of the programs had some kind of training coursework or a seminar, but this varied so widely. It was like a year, or a day, or a week, or 1 hour. I mean, it was just, there's all over the map, right? There's no consistency in the format. And formal supervision, Some programs had that. Others really just had sort of a loose consultation service. Just drop in if you have a problem, right? So, and these are the model programs, the ones that were reported into the guide. So I'm hopeful that we'll see some more, some additional entries that have a few more characteristics this year. But I think it's important to think about the trajectory of development that starts with graduate school. Right? So I've worked at this point with over 250 different graduate students who are teaching for the first time. So I've seen this trajectory play out many times. And graduate students, when they first, this is Buckeye. These are baby Buckeyes, by the way. As I work with the baby Buckeyes, the young Buckeyes. What's that?
They're not the yummy Buckeyes.
They're not the chocolate Buckeyes. No, this is an actual nut. This is poisonous, so we don't eat those in Ohio. But when graduate students first start teaching, and perhaps when you first started teaching, some of the research characterizes us in our first teaching experiences as senior learners, right? Where we're really kind of focused on our survival. We're just trying to make it day to day, right? We're just trying to get through the experience without doing a whole lot of harm to ourselves or anyone else, without teaching the wrong thing or doing something inappropriate. And concerns at this stage are usually, will the students like me? Am I doing a good job? There's just so much uncertainty. Then with a little more experience, we start to see people evolve into this, what we call colleagues in training. So colleagues in training really are starting to think about building specific skills. They start recognizing, at first the whole thing seems overwhelming, but then you can start to see how, oh, this is an issue of classroom management, or this is an issue of public speaking. And you can start figuring out which skills are the appropriate ones to build, and how am I going to work on this? But the predominant concern at this stage is really, what am I going to say when I go to class? What am I going to do? And that's very different because there's a very specific turning point I see when you get just a little more experience and you're in this stage called the junior colleague, where your focus really finally shifts to the student. What is my student going to do today? That's an important change in perspective, where you're really focused more on the learning and not yourself. And this comes with experience. It comes with a bit of actual experience in the classroom. And you're able to see that it's really not about yourself. You are just a vehicle by which you're really helping the students, and you're there for the students. And this is the work of Nyquist and Sprague and others who are not psychology-specific graduate student development work, but in the faculty development literature, the educational development literature, this model really thinks about the arc of development of our graduate students. And there's a similar arc in faculty development, so when people actually begin teaching for their career. In the early career, we're in this establishing stage, right? We're trying to get our feet under us, and this is the stage that I'm really very concerned about, because all of those skills that we talked about, yes, it's a lot of work for graduate students to take on those skills, but it's even more work when you are just starting out in your first maybe faculty job, and you've now suddenly got 4 classes, right? And you're trying to do all of the things that you're supposed to do to be successful in your job. That's not the time you really want to be learning all these skills either. So you're really just trying to get established. But then by mid-career, this phase is characterized by expanding, right? So we really are starting to think about becoming more expert in particular types of teaching styles, we're a little bit more willing to experiment in new pedagogies. And then senior career, they call this phase the generating phase, where you're really starting to think about your legacy, right? You're starting to think about these big pictures. But I will say it's really interesting, the seasons of your teaching, if you think about the seasons of your teaching, the kind of training and support you need is going to change depending on where you are. And how much of a conversation are we really having about this, right? How much of a conversation are we having about where you are in your career and the kind of development and training that you need? I think this is an opportunity for us to think about. Now, how do we get this? There's formal development opportunities. This is a picture from NITOP, which is a wonderful conference that happens in January. You can go to a workshop or a conference or an event on teaching like today, meet people, talk. Has anybody gotten new ideas while you've been here at APA? I hope you have. I think I certainly have. And there is research that shows that teachers who participate in professional development do use it to alter the way that they teach in their classroom, right? So it really does have an effect for people who participate in formal development. Also, mentoring. Oh my gosh, can't overstate the importance of mentoring. And there are formal development or mentoring programs like Preparing Future Faculty. STP has a mentoring program, but really mentoring your colleagues. Is anyone currently working as a mentor in this room? That's fantastic. I would love to see every hand in this room go up, right? Be a mentor, or is anyone a mentee currently? That's awesome. I'd also like to see all these hands go up because we can really have a lot to learn from one another. And not just at your own institution, but also people at other institutions. And frankly, I actually have marvelous colleagues in different disciplines altogether, and I learn just as much, if not more, from my colleagues in economics and journalism, in communications and political science than I do from people in psychology. So I want to say, certainly give some thought to who you would like to have as a mentor. Who would you like to learn from? And it's especially important for our non-tenure track faculty, right? I just really cannot, again, overstate how important it is because many adjuncts lack access to even, and I say adjuncts, but I really mean associated faculty, auxiliary faculty, anyone who's a non-tenure track faculty who's teaching. That's important work, and it's under-supported work, right? Often people in this position are not plugged into the same channels to receive this kind of support. If there are associated faculty at your institution, I would hope all of you would reach out and see what you can do to support them. They need all of our help. Typically get their teaching assignments at the last minute, just days before class starts. 94% receive no campus orientation, right? They don't even, oftentimes when I first started, I didn't even know how to work the copier. There was no one to tell me. I wasn't added to a listserv for 5 years. It took a long time, right? I never knew. I know it's outrageous. His face was like, what? I know. But it was, for 5 years. They were having parties and people were coming and going. I was like, what happened to Sonia? Oh, she retired. Didn't you know? No, I had no idea. So really think about, when we think about inclusion in our students, think about inclusion in our teaching community as well. Observation is such a great way to build skills. How many of you have been observed this year in their classroom? If you haven't been, seek out that opportunity. How many of you have been an observer? Oh, that's great. I love to see all these hands go up. You can learn so much from observation, and there are different ways that you can go about being observed. There's the evaluative kind, right? But there's also developmental observation, which is really a consultant or a developer can come to see your teaching, or just for peer review. We don't really think about peer review as it applies to our teaching, do we? Would we trust research that hadn't gone through peer review? I mean, isn't that kind of like the foundation of the academy? But how often are we consulting with colleagues about the things that we're doing in our classes, the assessments that we're giving, the exams that we're writing, sometimes at the last minute, right? Wouldn't that benefit from a little peer review, a little, input from colleagues? And it really does have benefits to be observed. In fact, in this non-evaluative way, many campuses now have open classroom weeks where you can drop in and see other teachers. These are wildly popular at places like Rice and Vanderbilt. And this particular study that was out a couple of years ago, they found that one of the main reasons that people sought out the opportunity to observe was to learn new techniques, right? To see how people did active learning in their classroom, or how they managed different activities in their classroom, or how they handled student issues in their classrooms, right? So we learning from one another can be done through observation. Also, the COPUS. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the COPUS, the Classroom Observation Protocol for Undergraduate STEM. Has anyone heard of the COPUS before? I see a few hands. It's actually a tool Carl Wieman and others have developed. And so this is just a snapshot of what you get. You have someone observe your teaching, and they record in 5-minute intervals what you're doing and what your students are doing. And at the end, they give you a breakdown, right? And so in a lecture-based course, which is the top 2 blue graphs, you can see the pie is all blue because there's only one thing that's happening. The teacher is lecturing, and the students are taking notes. But in a more active class, teachers and students are doing lots of other things. If you're using varied instructional practices, students are writing and asking questions, answering questions, moving through the classroom, right, working together. And so you get just a more diverse look of your class. Now, I will say again, teaching is cognitive load. Oftentimes, I'll go and observe new instructors, and they'll say, I can't wait for you to see all the active learning that I have in my class. It's like 5 minutes. How long do you think that took? Oh, I don't know. That took a long time. It was 5 minutes. It feels like a lot longer, though, when you're doing it, right? So it's hard. So it's nice to have this objective data to be able to say, oh, this is actually how that time breaks down. So just a tool that we can use in our classrooms from STEM. And then, of course, self-reflection. Oftentimes, we think of teaching portfolios as some sort of summative, and we're just making them to go out into the job market. But the real benefit of a portfolio is for self-reflection, right? What are your values in teaching? And what is the evidence that you are enacting those values in the way you teach your class, in the assignments that you create, in the outcomes that your students achieve? Right? So I would really encourage you to think about, if you haven't in a while, dusting off your portfolio and thinking about that as really sort of a tool for personal reflection, even if you're not thinking about using it on the job market. And then, of course, some wonderful self-assessments. If you have a teaching center, you could ask for a consultation on your campus, or if you don't, certainly a self-assessment like the Model Teaching Competencies and the TBC. So these, again, this is the Model Teaching Competencies. It lets you self-assess and score. And then the Teacher Behavior Checklist, which is Bill Busquist and colleagues' work, which gives you a set of 28 characteristics, and you can sort of self-reflect. You can ask your students to give input, too. Now, one thing I want to say is that we have to think not just about building our skills, but also pruning our skills. Now, I'm really a terrible gardener. I'm going to confess to you. I have a little garden motif happening here, but I'm really not much of a gardener. I kill everything. So last year, I actually invited a garden coach. This was the best thing ever. I got a garden coach to come to my house, this very knowledgeable person. And she sagely walked around my yard, and we talked about my trees and all my plants, and she told me all of the things that I was doing wrong. And the worst thing she took me to task for was pruning. I'm a terrible pruner. I hack away indiscriminately at my plants. She felt very strongly about this because, you see, when you're pruning a tree, for those of you, some of you may know more than I do about this, you have to be very careful where you cut. So if you look at this diagram here, the first line is a cut that's kind of halfway up the branch. It's up the branch a bit. That's not a good place. That's called stump pruning. It's not good for the tree. Because what happens is if the branch has grown too long and you cut too high up, then it can die back into the tree and actually kill the tree. If you cut too close to the trunk, which line 3 is into the branch collar, I have come to learn that's what that is. If you cut into the branch collar also, you will damage the tree and it may die. So there's an appropriate point just where the tissue is right, and that's line 2, which is not too high up the branch and not too close to the trunk of the tree. And you have to know where to prune your tree so that it will be healthy and will bear fruit, right? I think there's a big parallel there in our teaching. We have to know not just where to develop our skills, but we have to also be thoughtful about where we prune our skills. And when do we stop doing something that maybe we have been doing in the classroom for a long time, but maybe we don't need to anymore. Maybe we need to go a different way for the health of the overall organism, right? For the health of the tree. So I want you also to think about what have you been doing for a while that maybe you could stop or change. Because what's at stake? As we're wrapping up here today, I want to think about why should we care about any of this, right? Because there's a lot of people who just really don't. You are not among them, thankfully, but there are a lot of people who don't. So what is at stake if we don't do any of this, or if we do it badly? Our students. I think it's actually an enormous victory for higher education. We've heard many times today how diverse our students are in so many ways. It's a victory for higher education that we have this diversity in our classrooms, that our classrooms are attracting students who are diverse in so many ways. And we have to have the skills that they deserve. We have to bring to them the kind of teaching that they need. That is our obligation. Right? Our classrooms are growing more and more and more diverse. We have to know how to meet those needs. At the same time, the price of college keeps going up. Right? You've all seen the tuition increases. Is anybody getting a tuition reduction on your campus? If so, I would like to know where that is happening. But the price keeps growing up. Student readiness keeps going down. And if we look at completion rates, we see it's alarming that our underserved students have the lowest completion rate. So Black and Latinx students are significantly less likely to complete their college degree. So what alarms me even more about this graph is that not only are Black and Latinx students leaving college before they have completed their degree, they are leaving with debt because they have paid to be there, but they did not earn a degree that will help them pay for that debt. And everyone at graduation needs to get a job. And we need to be thinking of that. How can we support our students in that next stage of their life? Not just after we file our grades, but what's going to happen to them when they leave our classes. So again, I want to return to a quote from Diane's paper and her colleagues. In the midst of all the varieties of change, there's one constant. The attainment of higher education is still the passport for entry into the middle class. A critical fact that should affect the way we work and what we value about our work. As academic psychologists, we help to prepare the next generation of workers and leaders. That is our job. We need to be up to this task. And she said this a long time ago. And what have we done since then? Have we done enough? I don't know. But we can. So some of my colleagues and I have issued this charge recently. And so I want to say it again. Professional development grounded in the science of learning should be available to everyone who teaches at all levels. We should remove barriers to total research, but pedagogy should be studied systematically. Learning principles successful in the laboratory should be translated into the classroom, and we need support to do that. We really should establish basic teaching competencies for graduate students, basic expectations that you will know these clusters of skills that will help you in teaching, and we really should be rewarding exceptional teaching, but we should do it on the basis of evidence, right? What is the evidence? Evidence-based criteria and high-quality educational research. So, there you have it. There's a lot there. The other day we went to Hamilton, and there's a line in Hamilton that I just keep playing over and over in my head. Look around. Look around. What a wonderful time it is to be alive, right? How wonderful it is to be alive right now. That's a beautiful, optimistic quote. And it is. It's a wonderful time to be alive. We have such opportunity for our students. There's so much that we can do. So I hope that I've helped you to think a little bit about this issue today, about the challenges and also the opportunities for you. And so I would like to challenge all of you as you leave here to think, what are you going to do now in the coming year to enhance your teaching? What things can you do? What are you willing to take on? And what are you willing to do to improve training and support for teaching of psychology more broadly? And I hope you all will do your part, some little part, to take on this big question. Thank you so much for your time today.